The Mercy Ward Scene 1, The Arrival. Frank Harmon was halfway through replacing the iron horseshoe above Unit 7 when he heard tires on gravel. He looked up from the stepladder, hammer in hand. February at Ironwood Retreat meant quiet. Most folks didn't think about weekend getaways when the hollow was frozen and the creek ran gray with winter runoff. He'd winterized only 3 units this season, and 2 of those sat empty. Reservations didn't pick up until April, when the woods turned green and people could pretend the place was just another bed and breakfast. The car that pulled into the lot was a late 70s sedan, maybe a Plymouth, with Ohio plates and rust eating the wheel wells. It rolled to a stop near the office, engine ticking in the cold. Frank waited. Sometimes people got lost on the back roads, ended up here by accident, looking for directions back to Route 43. Most took one look at Ironwood and kept driving. This one didn't.
The driver's door opened. A woman stepped out, maybe mid-40s, wearing jeans and a winter coat that had seen better seasons. She stood beside the car for a moment, staring at the lodge like she wasn't quite sure how she'd gotten there. Her face had the hollowed-out look Frank had learned to recognize over the years. Not just tired, haunted. He climbed down from the ladder, set the hammer on the porch railing of Unit 7. The woman watched him approach but didn't move toward him. Just stood there, one hand resting on the car's open door like she might need to get back in fast. "Help you?" Frank called. She blinked. "I think I need a room." Not the usual way people asked. Frank stopped a few feet away, studied her. "You got a reservation?" "No." She shook her head slowly. "I was driving, just trying to clear my head. But then I started turning onto roads I didn't know, following something." She looked at him, and he saw confusion in her eyes. Not crazy, but close. "Does that make sense?" It did, more than she knew. "Where are you coming from?" Frank asked. "Columbus. I've been staying with my sister." She glanced back at the car, then at the lodge, then at him. "I didn't mean to come here. I wasn't even paying attention to where I was going, really. Just driving. But every time I saw a sign, I knew which way to turn, like something was pulling me." The cold settled deeper into Frank's chest. He'd seen this before. Not often, but enough. "What's your name?" Carla Simmons." "You know anyone out this way, Carla?" "No. Never been to Grindstone Hollow before today." She wrapped her arms around herself. "This is crazy. I should just go back." But she didn't move toward the car. Frank watched her for another moment. The afternoon light was already failing, shadows stretching long across the gravel lot behind the lodge. The woods pressed close, bare branches reaching toward the gray sky. The temperature was dropping fast. It'd be full dark in an hour. "Too cold to talk out here," he said finally. "Come inside. I'll make coffee." Relief flickered across her face. She shut the car door, followed him across the lot to the lodge. Frank held the door for her, noted the way she glanced back at her car twice before stepping inside. People who came to Ironwood always looked back, like they already knew. On some level, that leaving wouldn't be easy. The lodge office was small, but warm. Frank kept the wood stove burning through winter, more out of habit than necessity. The main room held a desk, a few chairs, a coffee maker on a side table. Maps of the area hung on the walls, though they didn't do much good. The hollow didn't show up right on maps. Never had. "Sit," Frank said, gesturing to one of the chairs. "Coffee's fresh from this morning. Not great, but it's hot." Carla sat, perched on the edge of the chair, like she might need to run. Frank poured 2 cups, handed her one. She wrapped both hands around it, staring into the steam. "You said you're staying with your sister," Frank said, settling into the chair behind the desk. "You from Columbus originally?" "No, Dayton." She took a sip, grimaced at the taste, but didn't complain. "I moved to Columbus 6 months ago, after I lost my job." "What kind of work?" "I was a nurse. ER, trauma unit." She said it quiet, like admitting to something shameful. 22 years at St. Mary's. Then I couldn't do it anymore. Frank set his cup down. What happened? Carla stared at the coffee. I froze, during a code. Patient was coding, everyone moving, doing their jobs, and I just stood there. Couldn't move, couldn't think. She swallowed hard. By the time I snapped out of it, he was gone. 28 years old, heart defect nobody caught. The silence stretched between them. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows.
They didn't fire me, Carla continued. Said I could take medical leave, see a counselor, come back when I was ready. But I knew I couldn't go back. Not after that. She looked up at Frank. So I quit, moved in with my sister and their family. Been there 6 months now, sleeping in their guest room, eating their food. My savings are almost gone. I need to find work, but I can't face nursing again, and I don't know how to do anything else. That why you were driving around? I guess. Ellen, my sister, she's been patient, but I can see it wearing on her. Her husband, too. They've got 2 kids, a mortgage. They don't need a middle-aged freeloader who can't get her act together. Carla's hands tightened on the cup. This morning at breakfast, Ellen asked if I'd started looking for jobs yet, and I just couldn't be in that house anymore. So I got in the car and drove. Frank nodded. He'd heard variations of this story before. People running from something, thinking distance would help. Most of them ended up at Ironwood without knowing why. How'd you find Maple Grove Road? He asked. I don't know. I was on Route 43, heading south, not really thinking about where I was going. Then I saw a sign for Old Mill Road, and I knew I had to turn. Didn't question it, just turned. Then another turn, then another. Next thing I knew, I was pulling in here. You remember what the sign said? She frowned. Old Mill Road, then Maple Grove. I think. After that it gets fuzzy. Frank leaned back in his chair. The wood stove crackled. Carla watched him, waiting for him to say something that would make this make sense. He could tell her the truth, but that rarely went well. People weren't ready to hear about the Hollow, about why it called to certain folks. They had to learn it the hard way. You want a room for the night? He asked instead. I don't know what I want. She looked around the office, at the maps, the old photographs on the walls. Is this place safe? The question hit different when you knew what she was really asking. Safe as anywhere, Frank said. Which was true enough. The Hollow was dangerous, but it followed rules. Iron and salt, locked doors, and honest answers. People who respected those rules usually walked away. Usually. How much for a night? $45, includes the room, coffee in the morning. Carla reached into her coat pocket, pulled out a worn wallet. She counted out bills slowly, like someone who knew exactly how much money she had left and how long it needed to last. When she handed him the cash, her hands were shaking. Frank took the money, pulled a registration card and pen from the desk drawer. Need your name, address, license plate number. She filled it out in careful block letters. Frank watched her write, saw the precision in each stroke. Nurse's handwriting, trained to be clear, legible. No room for mistakes that could kill someone. She slid the card back across the desk. Unit 4's available, Frank said, standing. It's small, but the heat works. Got a bathroom, double bed, table and chairs, kitchenette if you need it. He pulled a key from the board on the wall. Let me grab you an iron horseshoe. Old tradition here. You'll want to hang it above your door. Frank walked to the supply cabinet, pulled out a small horseshoe. When he turned back, Carla was already heading for the door. I'll get my bag from the car, she said. Frank followed her outside. The temperature had dropped another 10 degrees in the few minutes they'd been inside. Carla walked to her car, opened the back door, pulled out a small overnight bag. Then she popped the trunk. Frank watched as she reached in. She paused, staring down at something, then picked up a plastic ID badge on a lanyard. From where he stood, Frank could make out the words St. Mary's Medical Center and a photo of her younger, smiling. Carla held it for a long moment, thumb rubbing across the surface, then slipped it into her coat pocket. Come on, he said. I'll show you to Unit 4. He led her across the lot to the line of units that faced the woods.
Ironwood Retreat had been built in the mid-70s after the Guardians officially abandoned the area. Frank's father had insisted someone needed to stay, to keep watch, so he built the retreat, 5 small units and a lodge right on the edge of the hollow, close enough to matter, far enough to survive. Most of the time. Unit 4 sat third in the line, a log cabin like the others, with a small porch and a rocking chair facing the woods. Frank unlocked it, pushed the door open, and stepped aside to let Carla look. The interior was basic. One room with a double bed against the far wall, a small table with 2 chairs by the window, a kitchenette with a sink, hot plate, and mini fridge. A door on the left led to the bathroom. Clean, functional, nothing fancy. Heat's electric baseboard, Frank said, pointing to the units along the walls. Thermostats by the bed. Gets cold at night this time of year, so turn it up. Carla stepped inside, set her bag on the bed. Frank held out the iron horseshoe. Hang this above your door, inside. She took it, turned it over in her hands. Why? Old tradition. And lock your door at night, Frank continued. You hear anything strange, come find me in the office. Carla looked at the horseshoe, then at Frank. Her expression was hard to read. Confusion, wariness, exhaustion, all mixed together. Okay, she said finally. Just that. No argument, no questions. Like some part of her already understood, she needed to follow the rules here, even if she didn't know why. Frank nodded. You need anything? I'm in the lodge. He stepped back outside, pulled the door closed. Waited until he heard the lock click into place. Then he walked back toward the lodge, hands in his pockets, head down against the wind. The sun was sinking behind the trees now, painting the sky in shades of gray. No color this time of year, just cold and shadow. Inside the lodge, Frank sat at the desk and pulled out the leather notebook his father had kept. He flicked to a blank page, wrote the date, February 24th, 1984. Below that, Carla Simmons, Unit 4, arrived 4:30 p.m. Then, ER nurse, 22 years, lost patient 6 months ago, froze during code. He stared at those last 3 words. The flatline would come for her tonight. He was certain of it. The creature fed on medical guilt, on the weight of lives lost. And Carla Simmons carried that weight heavy. Frank closed the notebook, slid it back in the drawer. He'd given her the iron, told her to lock the door. That was all he could do. The rest was up to her. Outside, darkness fell completely, and somewhere in that darkness, beyond the circle of light that marked Ironwood Retreat's boundary, the hollow began to wake. A Mercy Ward Scene 2, settling in. Carla stood in the middle of Unit 4, holding an iron horseshoe and trying to make sense of what had just happened. The drive from Columbus felt like something that had happened to someone else. Sitting at Ellen's kitchen table that morning, staring at job listings in the Sunday paper, while her sister's patient, worried voice washed over her. The sudden need to leave, to drive, to move. Getting in the car without a plan, without a destination. Then the turns. Those certain deliberate turns onto roads she'd never seen before. No hesitation, no second guessing, just knowing which way to go, like following invisible breadcrumbs that only she could see. And now she was here, in a cabin in the woods, being told to hang horseshoes and lock doors. The unit was small but clean. 1 room, maybe 15 by 20 feet. The double bed sat against the far wall, covered with a faded quilt. A small table with 2 wooden chairs occupied the space by the window. The kitchenette along the left wall held a sink, a 2-burner hot plate, and a mini fridge that hummed quietly. A door on the right led to what she assumed was the bathroom. Utilitarian, that was the word. Like a hospital room stripped of medical equipment. Functional, nothing more. The heating unit under the window clanked and hissed, working to push warmth into the space. Carla walked over, adjusted the thermostat. The metal was cold under her fingers. She should leave. Drive back to Columbus. Apologize to Ellen for running out. Start actually looking through those job listings. Get her life back on some kind of track before her savings ran completely dry. and she became a permanent burden on her sister's family. Carla walked to the door, put her hand on the knob. Her hand wouldn't turn it. She tried again, willed her fingers to grip, to twist, to open the door. Nothing happened. Her arm felt weighted down, locked in place by something she couldn't name. Not paralyzed, just held. This is insane, she thought. But the compulsion was still there, humming under her skin like a low-voltage current. That pull that had dragged her down back roads and onto Maple Grove Road. That certainty that she was supposed to be here, even though she didn't know why. She let go of the knob. Her hand moved fine then. Normal. No resistance. Carla stepped back from the door, heart beating faster. She tried one more time, reaching for the knob. The weight settled back in immediately, heavy and immovable. She was trapped, not by locks or bars, but by whatever had called her here. Frank had known. That's why he'd said she could try to leave, but wouldn't make it past the county line. He'd seen this before. People showing up alone, unable to leave, following strange rules to survive things they couldn't explain. Carla looked at the horseshoe in her hand. If she couldn't leave, she might as well do what Frank had told her. She found the nail above the doorframe, right where he'd said it would be. Old, driven deep into the wood. She slipped the horseshoe onto it, open end pointing up. The metal settled into place with a soft clink. The moment it did, something in the room shifted, barely noticeable, like a pressure she hadn't been aware of suddenly easing. The air felt different, safer. Somehow, Carla stared at the horseshoe. Just a piece of curved iron, nothing special. But the room felt different with it there. She shook her head, turned away. This whole situation was making her paranoid. Her overnight bag sat on the bed where she dropped it. Carla unzipped it, pulled out the few things she'd thrown in that morning. A change of clothes, toothbrush, a book she'd been trying and failing to read for weeks. Everything grabbed in a hurry, without thought. She reached into her coat pocket, pulled out the nursing badge. The plastic was worn smooth at the edges from years of use. Her photo stared back at her. 3 years old now, taken in 1981. She looked younger in the picture. Confident, wearing scrubs, hair pulled back, the small smile of someone who knew what they were doing. That version of herself felt impossibly distant now. The badge showed her name, her department, her credentials. RN, BSN, TNCC, ACLS. Letters that meant she'd trained for this work, studied for it. Proven she could handle trauma and chaos and death. Letters that meant nothing when you froze at the bedside of a dying patient. August 14th. That was the night everything had broken. The night she'd stood useless while a 28-year-old's heart stopped beating and stayed stopped. She'd replayed it 1,000 times. The monitor alarming, the crash cart, hands reaching for equipment. Her standing there, frozen, while everyone else moved with practiced urgency. They'd pulled her out of the room eventually. Someone else had taken her place. She'd sat in the break room, shaking, while the code continued without her. And 15 minutes later, someone came to tell her he was gone. Carla set the badge on the nightstand, face down. She didn't want to look at it anymore. The window faced the woods. She walked over, looked out. Dusk was falling, the trees fading to dark shapes against the dimming sky. A light glowed from the lodge across the parking lot. Frank's silhouette moved past the window, visible for just a moment before disappearing. She wondered how many people he'd given that same warning to. Lock your door. Don't answer. How many had listened? How many had left? Her stomach growled, reminding her she hadn't eaten since that morning coffee at Ellen's. The kitchenette held a mini fridge and some cabinets. She opened the fridge. Empty. The cabinets held 2 mugs, a pot, and a dented pan. No food. She should have stopped for groceries. But the compulsion to get here had been too strong, drowning out practical thoughts like dinner or supplies. Carla filled one of the mugs with tap water, drank it standing at the sink. Through the kitchenette window, she could see more trees, more darkness. The hollow pressed close on all sides. Not isolated, surrounded. She checked her watch. 6:15. She had no idea what to do with the rest of the evening. No TV, no phone, no distractions. Just her thoughts and the silence. Carla sat at the small table, stared at nothing. Her mind kept circling back to the same question. Why had she frozen? What had broken inside her brain to make her lock up at the exact moment someone needed her most? She'd worked trauma for 22 years, seen worse injuries, harder codes, younger patients. What made August 14th different? No answer came. It never did. At 7:10, while washing her face in the bathroom, Carla heard something. Beeping. Faint. Rhythmic. The unmistakable sound of a cardiac monitor. She froze, hands gripping the edge of the sink. Water still running. Listened. Beep, beep, beep. Steady. Regular. The sound of a normal sinus rhythm. The kind she'd heard thousands of times in the ER. Then the pattern changed. Faster. Irregular. V-tach. Her brain recognized it instantly. Ventricular tachycardia, the heart's rhythm spiraling toward chaos. Then the flatline tone. Long, sustained, unmistakable. Carla stood there, water running over her hands, heart hammering. The sound cut off abruptly. Silence rushed back in. She forced herself to breathe. Old pipes, Frank had said. Heating system. Old buildings made weird noises. She was just on edge, hearing patterns in random sounds because her brain was trained to listen for them. She turned off the water, dried her hands, looked at herself in the mirror. Pale. Shadows under her eyes. Hair going gray at the temples. When had she started looking so old? The beeping didn't come back.
Carla returned to the main room.
The heating unit clanked again, settling. That must have been it. Metal expanding, pipes knocking. Nothing more. She tried to read, sat at the table with the book open in front of her, reading the same page over and over. The words wouldn't stick. Her mind kept drifting. At 7:30, she gave up. Lay down on the bed, fully clothed, staring at the ceiling. The light outside the window was fading fast. February darkness came early. The ceiling had water stains in one corner. Old marks from some long ago leak. She traced the patterns with her eyes, looking for shapes. That one looked like a profile. That curve could be a bird. Her thoughts drifted to August, to the patient, to the moment everything had fallen apart. She tried not to think about it, but lying here in the growing darkness, with nothing to distract her, the memories came anyway. The sun set at 6:47. The room grew dark. Carla didn't get up to turn on the lights, just lay there, watching the shadows deepen, waiting. For what? She didn't know. The Mercy Ward, Scene 3. First night, the waiting. Carla lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling. She hadn't turned on the lights after the sun went down. Just lay there on top of the blankets, fully clothed, listening to the sounds of the hollow settling into night. Wind in the trees, the heating unit clanking, small creaks and groans from the cabin's frame. Every sound felt close. The unit was small, just one room with the bathroom off to the side. Nowhere to hide from the noises, nowhere to escape the feeling that the walls were pressing in. At 8:47, the siren went off. Carla jerked upright, heart slamming. The sound came from somewhere distant, echoing across the hollow. Old and mechanical, the kind of warning that belonged to air raid drills or tornado alerts. It rose and fell in a wail that seemed to come from everywhere at once. She sat frozen, listening. The sound bounced off the trees, distorted by distance and winter air. It lasted maybe a minute, maybe two. Then it died down, leaving a silence so complete it felt like the world had stopped breathing. Carla lay back down, pulse still racing. Frank had warned her about the siren. 8:47 every night, just part of living out here. But it felt like a marker, a boundary being crossed. Day ending, night beginning. The sounds after the siren felt different, amplified. The wind seemed louder, more purposeful. Branches scraped against the roof. The heating pipes knocked and rattled. Every noise made her flinch. She tried to tell herself it was just an old building. Old pipes, old wood. everything expanding and contracting with the temperature changes. Nothing unusual, nothing wrong. But her body knew better. Every nerve on high alert, waiting for something she couldn't name. 9 o'clock came and went, then 10. Carla stayed on the bed, watching the shadows shift across the ceiling. The moon must have been out, filtering through the window. The darkness wasn't complete. Just enough light to see shapes, to imagine movement where there was none. At 10:30, she got up to use the bathroom. Locked herself inside, even though she was alone. The mirror showed her face, pale and drawn. She splashed cold water on her cheeks, dried off with a thin towel. When she came back to the main room, everything looked the same. Door locked, chain in place. Horseshoe hanging above the frame. Window dark, curtains closed. Nothing had changed, but the air felt different, heavier, like the pressure before a storm.
Carla lay back down, checked her watch. 10:45. She should try to sleep. Morning would come, and maybe with it some clarity. Maybe she'd wake up and the compulsion would be gone. Maybe she could leave, drive back to Columbus, pretend this whole trip had never happened. But sleep felt impossible. Her mind was too active, her body too tense. And somewhere deep down, she knew something was coming. At 11:30, she heard it. A knock on the door, soft, almost polite. 3 slow taps. Carla's breath caught. She didn't move, just lay there, staring at the ceiling, every muscle locked. Another knock, same rhythm. Tap, tap, tap. Then a voice, male, weak, pained. Nurse? Carla's professional instinct kicked in immediately. Someone needed help. Someone was hurt. She should answer. She should see what they needed. She swung her legs off the bed, stood up, walked toward the door. I need help. Her hand reached for the doorknob. Then Frank's voice echoed in her memory. Lock your door. Don't answer no matter what. Carla's hand froze inches from the lock. She stood there, trembling. Please, the voice said. I can't breathe right. Every instinct screamed at her to open the door. This was what she'd trained for. 22 years of nursing, 22 years of responding to calls for help. Someone was in distress. She couldn't just stand here. But something in the voice was wrong. Too familiar. Like hearing a recording of someone you used to know. Nurse, please. I'm so cold. Carla backed away from the door, moved to the window beside it, the one that looked out onto the small porch. She pulled the curtain aside just enough to look out. A man stood on the porch, maybe 60 years old, wearing a hospital gown. The fabric hung loose on his frame, moving slightly in the wind. He stood perfectly still, pale in the moonlight, facing the door. Carla stared at him. Something about his posture, his face, the way he held himself, familiar. The man turned his head slowly, looked directly at the window, at her. You saved me once, Carla, he said. Help me again. The blood drained from her face. She knew him. The memories came flooding back. 1978, St. Mary's ER, bed 7. Late night shift, maybe 2 in the morning. Man brought in, clutching his chest, barely conscious. Massive heart attack. She'd been working trauma for 15 years by then. Knew the drill by heart. She'd run the code, pushed epi, called for the paddles, worked the compressions. Standard protocol, executed perfectly. And it had worked. His heart had started again. Rhythm restored. He'd lived. She remembered the way he'd looked at her when he came around. Gripped her hand. Thanked her. 2 days later, he'd walked out of the hospital, shook her hand again at discharge, told her she'd saved his life. That was 6 years ago. This man looked exactly the same. Same age, same face. He hadn't aged a day. Let me in, Carla, he said. His voice was calm, patient. I'm so cold. She stumbled back from the window, hand over her mouth. This wasn't happening. Couldn't be happening. That patient was long gone by now.
dead, or at least elderly. This had to be someone else, a relative, a coincidence. But he knew her name. The knocking started again, harder now, more insistent. Carla opened the door. She ran to the bathroom, shut herself inside, locked that door too, pressed her back against it, sliding down to sit on the cold tile floor. The knocking continued, steady, persistent. Tap, tap, tap. Then harder. Bang, bang, bang. Carla. She pulled her knees to her chest, wrapped her arms around them, tried to breathe, tried to think. This wasn't real. It was stress, exhaustion, 6 months of guilt and nightmares finally breaking her mind. She was hallucinating. That was the only explanation. But the knocking was real. She could hear it through the bathroom door, through the main room, solid and undeniable. 5 minutes passed. 10. The knocking continued, never stopping, never changing rhythm. Then, abruptly, it stopped. Silence. Carla sat on the bathroom floor, counting her heartbeats. 1 minute, 2, 3, nothing. Slowly she stood, cracked the bathroom door open, looked out into the main room. Empty. The door was still locked, chain still in place, horseshoe still hanging above the frame. She crept to the window, looked out. The porch was empty. No one there. The patches of snow on the ground were undisturbed. No footprints. No sign anyone had been standing there. But she'd seen him, heard him. He'd been real. Carla backed away from the window, checked the door locks again. Everything secure. The horseshoe gleamed dully in the moonlight filtering through the window. She couldn't go back to the bed, couldn't lie down with her back to the door, vulnerable and exposed. Instead, she grabbed the blankets, dragged them into the bathroom, locked herself inside again. She sat on the floor, back against the tub, blankets wrapped around her shoulders. The rest of the night passed in fragments. She dozed fitfully, jerking awake at every sound. Wind, pipes, the heating unit cycling on and off. Her own heartbeat. Nothing felt safe. When gray light finally started seeping under the bathroom door, she allowed herself to believe she'd made it. First night survived. She unlocked the bathroom door, stepped back into the main room. Everything looked normal in the early dawn light. Door locked, windows intact, horseshoe in place. Carla walked to the window, looked out at the porch one more time. Empty. Just the rocking chair and the patches of melting snow. But somewhere in the back of her mind, she knew the truth. This was just the beginning. The Mercy Ward Scene 4. Morning After. Carla didn't wait for full daylight. At 8 in the morning, exhausted and desperate, she left Unit 4 and crossed the parking lot to the lodge. Frank was already up, standing at the coffee maker. He looked up when she entered, took in her appearance with one glance. Dark circles under her eyes, hair disheveled, coat thrown on over the same clothes she'd worn yesterday. The look of someone who hadn't slept. "Rough night?" he asked. Carla shut the door behind her, moved closer to the wood stove. The heat felt good after the walk across the frozen lot. "I had a visitor." Frank's expression didn't change. He poured 2 cups of coffee, handed her one. "What kind of visitor?" "A man, in a hospital gown, standing on my porch around midnight, knocking on my door." She wrapped both hands around the cup, felt the warmth seep into her fingers. "He knew my name." "What did he say?" "He asked for help, said he couldn't breathe right, that he was cold, asked me to let him in." Carla took a sip of the terrible coffee, grimaced. "I didn't open the door. You told me not to. But I looked through the window, saw him standing there." "What did he look like?" "60s, maybe, pale, patient gown, like he'd just walked out of a hospital." She paused, stared into the coffee. "I recognized him." Frank set down his cup, From where? A code I ran, 1978, St. Mary's ER. Heart attack patient. Massive MI. Came in around 2 in the morning. I brought him back. Carla's hands tightened on the cup. But last night, he looked exactly the same, hadn't aged at all. Frank was quiet for a long moment. His face had gone still in a way that told Carla he understood something she didn't. "You said you were a nurse," Frank said finally. "I told you that yesterday." "What kind of nursing?" "ER, trauma." Carla looked up at him. "Why does that matter?" "How many code blues did you run over your career?" The question caught her off guard. "I don't know, 50, 70? I worked trauma for 22 years. Codes were part of the job." Frank leaned against the desk. "How many of those patients lived?" "Maybe half, little more." "And the man last night, he was your first code?" Carla thought back, 1978, early in her trauma career, still learning the rhythms of emergency medicine. That patient had been one of her first successful resuscitations. She'd been so proud when his heart started beating again. "Yes," she said. "He was my first. How many code blues have you run total?" Frank asked. "You said 50, 70. How many exactly?" 3. The word came out before she could stop it. Frank's eyes sharpened. 3 total, or 3 that mattered? Carla's throat went tight. She knew what he was asking. 3 that I can't forget. 2 lived. 1 she couldn't finish. The one that didn't. How long ago? 6 months. August. Frank closed his eyes. When he opened them again, his expression had changed. Not surprised, resigned. "You need to leave," he said. "Today, right now." "What? Why?" Carla stood up. "What's happening?" Frank walked to the window, looked out at the hollow. "This place. Sometimes it calls to people. People with unfinished business. You shouldn't have come." "I didn't mean to come. I just ended up here." "I know. That's why you need to go." He turned back to her. "Get in your car. Drive back to Columbus. Don't stop. Don't look back. Just leave." Carla set down her coffee cup. "You think I haven't tried? I can't leave. Every time I think about going, something stops me. Like there's a weight holding me here." "Try again," Frank said. "Right now. I'll watch." Carla walked back outside. The morning air was bitter cold, her breath fogging. She crossed to her car, got in, shut the door. The engine started fine, turned over smooth like always. She put her hand on the gear shift. The weight settled in immediately. Heavier than yesterday, more insistent, like an invisible hand pressing down on her arm, her chest, her will. She tried to shift into drive. Her fingers wouldn't move. The compulsion tightened like a fist around her lungs. Stay. She tried anyway, willed her hand to grip the shifter, to pull it down into drive. Nothing happened. Her arm felt locked, paralyzed. The pressure increased, crushing. Carla sat there for 5 minutes, fighting it. Sweat broke out on her forehead, despite the cold. Her hand trembled on the shifter, but wouldn't move. Finally, she gave up, turned off the engine, got out. Frank stood on the lodge porch, watching. He didn't look surprised. "It's stronger today," Carla said, walking back to him. "It will be. The longer you stay, the harder it gets to leave." Frank came down the steps. "Until you deal with what brought you here." "I don't understand any of this." "You don't have to understand. You just have to survive." Frank looked at her seriously. "Tonight you keep that door locked, no matter what. Don't answer. Don't look. Don't engage. You understand? That's it? That's your advice?" "That's the rule. Whatever you see out there, whatever you hear, it can't get in unless you let it." He paused. "So don't let it." Carla wrapped her arms around herself. The cold was seeping through her coat. "What was that thing last night? That man?" Frank hesitated. She could see him weighing how much to tell her. "Something old," he said finally. "Something that feeds on guilt. Medical guilt, specifically. Nurses, doctors, EMTs, anyone who's lost patience and carries the weight of it." He met her eyes. "It takes the shape of the ones you couldn't save, comes knocking, demands answers." "But I did save him.
That patient from 1978, he lived. Doesn't matter. It's not about who lived or died. It's about who you remember, who you carry. Frank's voice was gentle but firm. And you're carrying someone, Carla. Someone from 6 months ago. The August patient. The one she'd frozen during. The one who died while she stood there, useless. What does it want? Carla asked. Truth. Confession. You facing what really happened and why. Frank stepped closer. As long as you keep running from it, keep blaming yourself, it'll keep coming back. And on the third night, it gets what it wants. Which is you, one way or another. Carla felt ice spreading through her chest. You're saying it's going to kill me? I'm saying it's going to try. Frank looked toward Unit 4. But if you follow the rules, keep the iron up, stay inside, you might survive it. Some people do. And the ones who don't? Frank didn't answer. He didn't have to. Carla looked back at her car, at the freedom that sat 30 feet away, but might as well be on the other side of the world. I can't leave, can't face it, can't do anything. You can survive tonight, Frank said. One night at a time. That's all anyone can do here. He went back inside the lodge. Carla stood in the parking lot, cold wind cutting through her coat. The hollow pressed close on all sides, patient and hungry. She thought about the man from last night. The first code blue. The one she'd saved. If he came back tonight, it wouldn't be alone. The pattern was clear now. First night, first patient. Second night would be the second code blue. And the third night would be August, the motorcycle accident victim, the one she'd let die. Carla walked back to Unit 4, locked herself inside. The horseshoe still hung above the door. The lock still worked, but she knew now that walls and metal wouldn't be enough. Whatever was coming for her wouldn't stop until it got what it wanted. And she had 2 more nights to figure out what that was. The Mercy Ward, Scene 5, the day between. Carla spent the rest of Saturday morning in Unit 4, trying to convince herself that what happened last night wasn't real. Stress, exhaustion, 6 months of guilt finally breaking her mind. She was hallucinating. That was the only rational explanation. Except she knew it wasn't true. The man had been real, standing on her porch, pale in the moonlight, dressed in patient scrubs, knowing her name. Looking exactly like he had in 1978. She tried to remember the details of that code, the first of the 3 that haunted her. It had been late, 2 in the morning, maybe. She'd been working trauma for about 10 years by then, long enough to know the rhythms, but still young enough to feel the adrenaline spike with every alarm. The man had come in, clutching his chest. Massive MI, the paramedics said. Barely conscious, they'd wheeled him into bed 7. And Carla had taken point. The code had gone by the book. She'd started compressions, pushed epi, called for the paddles. His heart had stopped, flatlined completely. But she'd gotten it back. Return of spontaneous circulation after 4 minutes. The monitor showing sinus rhythm again, his chest rising and falling. He'd survived, been discharged a few days later in stable condition. So why was he here now? Why was he one of the 3 she couldn't forget? Carla stared at the ceiling, trying to remember his face from that night. Had there been something about him? Something that had made him stick in her memory when so many other codes had blurred together? She couldn't remember. Just that he'd been her first major save. The first time she'd brought someone back from the edge and felt like she'd truly earned her place in trauma medicine. The afternoon dragged. 1 o'clock became 2. The sun crawled across the sky with agonizing slowness. Carla watched the shadows shift across the unit's walls, counting the hours until dark. Because she knew what was coming tonight. If the first code blue patient had come last night, the second would come tonight. The pattern was clear, and she knew exactly who that would be. Spring of 1982. A woman, early 40s, overdose, found by her teenage daughter in the bathroom, unconscious, barely breathing. Pills scattered on the floor. The paramedics had brought her in around 4 in the afternoon. Carla had been ending her shift,
but stayed to help. The woman was in bad shape. Respiratory depression, heart rate dropping.
They'd intubated, pushed naloxone, started the protocol.
Carla remembered the daughter in the hallway, 16, maybe 17, crying, asking over and over if her mother was going to be okay. Carla had told her yes. Standard response, meant to comfort, but also true at the time. They'd gotten her back. The woman had survived, spent a week in ICU, then transferred to psych, then to rehab. Carla had seen her months later in the hospital cafeteria. The woman had stopped to thank her. Said she'd been sober for 4 months. Her daughter was doing better. Things were looking up. That had been 2 years ago. Carla had no idea what happened after that. Whether the woman stayed sober, whether she relapsed, whether she was even still alive. But tonight, she'd find out. At 3 o'clock, Carla tried to eat, found a vending machine granola bar in her bag from the drive yesterday. Forced herself to chew, to swallow. It tasted like cardboard. At 4, she checked the door locks. Deadbolt secure, chain in place, horseshoe still hanging above the frame. At 4:30, she considered calling Alan. There was no phone in the unit, but she could walk to the lodge, use Frank's phone. Tell her sister she was okay, that she'd be back soon. Except she couldn't leave, and she didn't know when she'd be back, and explaining any of this was impossible. At 5, someone knocked on the door. Carla jumped, heart racing. Then Frank's voice. "It's me." She opened the door. Frank stood on the porch, hands in his coat pockets, breath fogging in the cold. "Just checking in," he said. "You holding up?" Define holding up. Frank almost smiled. "Fair enough." He glanced past her into the unit. "You eaten anything?" "A granola bar." "That's not enough." "I'm not hungry." Frank nodded. "Tonight's going to be harder than last night. You know that, right?" "I figured." Carla wrapped her arms around herself. "What happens if I answer the door?" "Don't." "But what happens?" Frank was quiet for a moment. "You join them." The words settled cold in Carla's chest. "Join them where?" "Wherever they are. Whatever they've become." Frank looked at her seriously. "The thing that's coming for you, it collects people. Nurses who failed, who carry guilt. It takes them. And once it has you, you become part of it." Carla thought about the man from last night. The way he'd stood so still. The way his voice had sounded wrong, like a recording played through a broken speaker. "Are they dead?" she asked. "The people it takes?" "I don't know. My father thought maybe, or maybe they're just gone. Somewhere else. Doesn't matter much either way." Frank pulled his coat tighter. "Point is, don't open that door, no matter what you hear, no matter who asks, even if they sound like they need help. Especially then." Carla nodded. She understood. It would use her instincts against her. Her training. Her need to respond to people in distress. "Stay inside," Frank said. "Keep the lights on. If you need me, you scream. I'll hear you." He walked back toward the lodge. Carla watched him go, then closed the door, locked it, checked the locks twice. The sun was already low on the horizon. February darkness came early. She checked her watch, 5:45. An hour until sunset. Then the long wait until the knock came. Carla sat on the bed, fully dressed, lights on, stared at the door. The horseshoe gleamed dully above the frame, iron dark against the wood. Such a small thing to hold back death. At 6:47, the sun dropped below the horizon. Darkness fell like a curtain. The woods outside the window turned black, solid and impenetrable. Carla turned on every light in the unit. Overhead, table lamp, bathroom, flooded the space with as much brightness as she could, as if light could keep the darkness at bay. She sat on the bed, back against the wall, watching the door. Waiting. The thing that had called her here wasn't done with her, not by a long shot. The Mercy Ward, Scene 6, second night. The woman. Hours passed. Carla sat on the bed, back against the wall, watching the door. Every light in the unit blazed. Overhead fixture, table lamp, bathroom light streaming through the open door. She'd turned them all on after sunset, flooding the small space with as much brightness as she could manage. At 8:47, the siren went off. Carla jumped, despite expecting it. The sound echoed across the hollow, rising and falling, then cut off abruptly. Silence rushed back in. 9 o'clock, nothing. 10 o'clock, still nothing. 11 o'clock came and went. Carla sat rigid, listening. Wind in the trees, the heating unit cycling. Normal sounds. Nothing wrong. Maybe it was over. Maybe last night had been enough. The first patient had come, tested her, moved on. Maybe that was all the hollow wanted. Carla let herself hope, just a little. Maybe she could survive this. Maybe tomorrow she'd be able to leave. Midnight arrived. A soft knock on the door. Feminine. Hesitant. Nurse Simmons? Carla went rigid. She knew that voice. I need help. The woman's voice was weak, strained, like someone struggling to breathe. I can't. I took too many pills again. It was her. The overdose patient from 1982. Carla had known she'd come, had spent all afternoon preparing for it, but hearing the voice still hit like a physical blow. Please, I'm so cold out here. Carla didn't move. Just sat on the bed, hands gripping the blanket. Frake's warning echoed in her mind. Don't answer. Don't engage. You saved me, Carla. Brought me back. The woman knew things. Details. Not just generic pleas for help, like the man from the first night. This was different. My daughter was there, remember? She was crying. Carla remembered. 16 years old, terrified, watching paramedics wheel her mother into the ER. The girl had stood in the hallway, shaking, asking over and over if her mom was going to be okay. You told her I'd be okay. Carla had. Standard response, meant to comfort, but also true at the time. They'd gotten the woman back, stabilized her. She'd survived. And I was, for a while. A pause. Wind rattled the window. But then I did it again. The words settled cold in Carla's chest. She'd wondered about this woman over the years. Hoped she'd stayed clean, stayed in recovery. But in the back of her mind, she'd always known. Relapse rates for overdose patients were high. Most came back through the ER doors eventually. And this time, you weren't there to save me. Carla closed her eyes. The woman had relapsed, overdosed again, and this time she died. I waited, the woman said. Her voice was changing, growing colder. I waited for you to bring me back, like you did before, but you never came. I didn't know, Carla whispered. My daughter found me, just like the first time, but this time I didn't wake up. Carla's hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against the mattress, trying to steady herself. Please, Carla, just open the door. The temptation was overwhelming. Someone needed help. A patient was in distress. Every instinct screamed at her to respond, to open the door, to do her job. Carla stood up, walked toward the door. Her hand reached for the deadbolt. Frank's voice in her memory. You join them. She stopped, hand hovering over the lock. I'm so cold, the woman said. You saved me once. Save me again. Carla's fingers touched the deadbolt. All she had to do was turn it, open the door, help someone who needed her. But Frank had been clear. Don't open the door. Don't engage. The woman outside wasn't real, wasn't the patient she'd saved in 1982. It was something else wearing her shape. Carla backed away from the door. Please, the woman begged. Please, I'm dying out here. Scratching sounds, weak, desperate. Fingernails on wood. The pills, the woman said. I took benzodiazepines. 30 milligrams. My respiratory rate is dropping. I can feel it. You know what that means. Medical details, specific, accurate. The kind of information only Carla would understand. The woman was describing her symptoms in clinical terms, appealing directly to Carla's training. My pulse is thready. Oxygen saturation dropping. I need naloxone. I need intervention. Carla pressed her hands over her ears. But she could still hear the voice through the door. You're supposed to help people, Carla. She moved to the far corner of the unit, as far from the door as she could get. You took an oath. Carla slid down the wall, sat on the floor with her knees pulled to her chest. First, do no harm. Nearly 3 times, Carla almost got up, almost went to the door, almost opened it. Each time, she stopped herself, remembered Frank's warning, remembered what he'd said about people who open their doors. They joined them. The woman kept talking, kept begging, kept describing symptoms in medical terminology that made Carla's training scream at her to respond. Finally, after what felt like hours, Carla shouted through the door, "You're not real! Leave me alone!" Silence. Then the woman's voice, different now, cold, knowing, all pretense of weakness gone. "The third one's coming tomorrow, Carla." Carla's breath caught. "And you won't be able to resist that one." The voice was calm, matter of fact, like a diagnosis being delivered. "Because you know what you did." Footsteps, moving away from the door, fading into the distance. Carla sat on the floor, shaking. She waited 5 minutes, 10. When nothing else happened, she slowly stood, walked to the door, looked through the window beside it. The porch was empty. No one there. The snow on the ground showed no footprints, but she'd heard the woman. Heard her voice, her pleas, her accusations. Carla collapsed against the door, sliding down to sit with her back pressed against the wood. Tears streamed down her face, because the woman was right. Tomorrow was the 3rd night, the 3rd code blue, the one from August, the motorcycle accident victim, the 28-year-old who died while Carla stood frozen beside his bed. And she didn't know if she could survive facing him. The man from 1978 had lived. The woman from 1982 had survived. But the man from August had died directly because of her failure. Because she'd frozen at the crucial moment. That blood was on her hands. No distance, no time, no rationalization could change that fact. And tomorrow night, he would come to collect what she owed. Carla sat against the door until gray light started seeping through the windows. Dawn. Second night survived, but barely. And she knew with absolute certainty that she wouldn't survive the 3rd. The Mercy Ward, Scene 7, Frank's warning. Frank hadn't slept much. He'd sat in the lodge office most of the night, watching Unit 4's lights blaze across the parking lot. Around 2 in the morning, they'd finally gone off. He'd waited another hour before allowing himself to close his eyes. At 6, he was up again. Made coffee, checked the perimeter. The morning was gray and cold, snow clouds building over the hollow. He looked toward Unit 4. The lights were back on. He walked across the lot, knocked on the door. It opened immediately. Carla stood there, still wearing yesterday's clothes, hair disheveled, eyes red. She looked like she'd aged 10 years overnight. "You have to help me," she said. Frank stepped inside. The unit was warm, almost stifling. Every light on, blankets piled on the bed. Looked like someone trying to hold back darkness with whatever tools they had. "What happened?" he asked. Carla shut the door, locked it. "She came, last night. The second one. The woman from 1982. "How did you know?" "Pattern," Frank said. "They always come in order. First patient, second patient, third." He studied her. "You didn't open the door." "Almost did, 3 times." Carla wrapped her arms around herself. She knew things, details from that night. Her daughter's name, the medications I used. She described her symptoms in medical terms, like she was reading from a chart. Frank nodded. He'd heard similar stories before. The flatline didn't just manifest as the patients. It knew them, knew what they'd said, how they'd suffered, what would cut deepest into the nurses who treated them. "Tonight's the 3rd one," Carla said. Her voice was hollow. "The one from August, the one who died." "Tell me all the details of that night." Carla moved to the table, sat down heavily. Frank poured her some water from the tap, set it in front of her. She didn't touch it. August 14th, Thursday night, 11:47. Motorcycle accident. 28 years old, massive internal bleeding. He arrested in the trauma bay. She stared at the table. I was primary nurse. Started compressions, pushed drugs, everything by protocol. What went wrong? I saw something. Carla's hands clenched. Middle of the code, I looked up. There was a figure standing in the corner. Tall, wearing scrubs, but wrong. The fabric was too pale, too still. No face. Just smooth skin where the features should have been. Frank's chest went tight. Did anyone else see it? No.
I blinked, and it was gone. But in that moment, I hesitated, missed a compression cycle. The doctor yelled my name, and I just froze. Completely paralyzed. He had to push me aside, take over himself. Tears streamed down her face. But it was too late. The patient died, 12:14 a.m. The flatline, Frank said quietly. What? That's what my father called it. The thing you saw. Frank sat across from her. It's been here as long as anyone can remember. Feeds on medical guilt. Nurses, doctors, paramedics, anyone who's lost patients and can't let go. I don't understand. How can something like that exist? The Hollow's old. Older than Ironwood. Older than the town. Things live here that shouldn't. Frank's voice was steady, matter of fact. Most of them follow rules. Iron and salt, locked doors, honest answers. But the flatline's different. It doesn't just kill you. It collects you. Carla looked up. What do you mean? My father dealt with this thing once. 1976. Nurse from Columbus, similar story. 3 code blues haunting her, just like you. She lasted 2 nights. Frank paused. On the 3rd night, she opened the door. And? We found her the next morning, drowned. Creek water in her lungs, creek mud under her fingernails. But she was in her unit, door locked from the inside. Iron horseshoe still hanging above the door. Carla's face went pale. How is that possible? The flatline doesn't follow normal rules. When it takes you somewhere else. Creek, woods, wherever it wants. Then it brings you back, leaves you for us to find. Frank met her eyes. Message, maybe. Warning, I don't know. So I'm going to die. Not if you don't open that door. But eventually it'll get in anyway, like the nurse in 1976. No. Frank leaned forward. She opened the door, Carla, on her own. The 3rd patient came, and when the thing offered to take her, she went willingly. Why would she do that? Guilt. Maybe she thought she deserved it. Maybe she couldn't live with what she'd done. Frank's voice hardened. The flatline doesn't break down doors. It doesn't have to. It just waits for you to invite it in. Carla shook her head. I don't know if I can resist that. You have to, because there's no coming back from it. What are my options? Keep the door locked and hope it gives up? Yes, if the pattern holds after the 3rd night, it's done. The Hollow lets you go. And if I open the door?
Then I find you Monday morning, same as the nurse in 1976. Carla stood, walked to the window. Outside, the day was gray and cold. What if I run? Just get in my car and drive as far as I can? You already tried that. The compulsion won't let you leave until this is finished. So I'm trapped here, with that thing coming for me tonight. At least here you have a chance, Frank said. At least here you know the rules. Out there, alone, with no iron, no wards, no warning, it'll take you whenever it wants. Carla turned back to him. When will it come? If the pattern holds? Around midnight, same as the others. And I just keep the door locked. Don't answer, don't engage. That's it. Simple as that. Nothing about this is simple. Frank stood. No, but it's what you have. He moved toward the door. Stay in your unit. Keep lights on. I'll be watching. If you need me, you scream. I'll come. Will that help? I don't know, but I'll come anyway. He opened the door. Cold air rushed in. Frank, Carla said. He looked back. The nurse from 1976. What was her name? Margaret Hayes. Did she have family? Husband? 2 kids? Frank's expression was grim. They never understood what happened. How someone drowns in a locked room hundreds of feet from water. He stepped outside, pulled the door closed.
waited until he heard the lock click. Then he walked back to the lodge, hands in his pockets, shoulders hunched against the cold. Inside his office, he pulled out the leather notebook, flipped to the entry from 1976. His father's handwriting, precise and careful. Margaret Hayes, nurse. 3 code blues. Opened door on 3rd night. Found deceased. Drowned. Locked room. The flatline takes its toll. Below that, his father had written, some debts can't be paid. Some guilt can't be survived. All we can do is warn them and hope. Frank closed the notebook. He'd done his part, warned Carla, told her the rules, gave her the truth. Now it was up to her. He looked out the window toward Unit 4. Carla's silhouette moved past the window, pacing. Frank hoped she'd make it, but hope didn't count for much in the hollow, especially not on the 3rd night.
The Mercy Ward, Scene 8, The Long Day. Sunday was the longest day of Carla's life. Every minute felt like an hour. The sun crawled across the sky with agonizing slowness. She sat at the table, watching shadows shift across the walls, counting down the hours until dark. Noon came, 1 o'clock, 2. She tried to eat, found crackers in her bag, forced herself to chew. They tasted like dust. She washed them down with water from the tap, then sat back down to wait. 3 o'clock, 4. The afternoon stretched endlessly. She knew what was coming, knew who it would be. The 3rd code blue, the one from August, the motorcycle accident victim. Michael something. She couldn't remember his last name. 28 years old, fiancé, waiting at home, whole life ahead of him. Until he'd crashed his bike on Route 43 and ended up in her trauma bay. Carla closed her eyes, let the memory come. August 14th, 1983. Thursday night, 11:47 p.m. She'd been ending a double shift, exhausted but still functioning. Then the call came. Motorcycle accident, massive trauma, patient critical. They'd wheeled him in on a gurney. Young, pale, road rash down the right side of his face. Leather jacket cut away by paramedics. Blood everywhere. Internal bleeding, the medics said. Lots of it. Carla had taken point. She was the senior nurse on duty, the one with 20-plus years of experience. She'd run codes like this before. Knew the protocol by heart. They'd intubated him, started lines, pushed fluids, called for blood. The surgeon was coming, 10 minutes out. Just had to keep him stable until then. But his pressure kept dropping. Heart rate climbing, then falling. The monitor showed ventricular tachycardia, then bradycardia. He was crashing. Carla's had started compressions, called for the paddles. The resident pushed epi while she worked. Everything by the book, everything right. Then she'd looked up and seen it, standing in the corner of the trauma bay. Tall figure, wearing scrubs, but wrong. The fabric too pale, almost luminescent. No face, just smooth, blank skin where features should have been. Carla had blinked, thinking it was exhaustion, a trick of the light. But it was still there, standing perfectly still, watching. No one else reacted. The other nurses kept working. The resident kept pushing drugs. No one saw it, just Carla. She'd hesitated, just for a second. Lost her rhythm on the compressions. Missed a cycle. The doctor had shouted her name. Simmons. Compressions. But she couldn't move. The figure in the corner held her frozen. Not physically, just the knowledge that something was wrong. Something was there that shouldn't be. The paralysis had lasted maybe 5 seconds, but that was enough. The doctor had pushed her aside, taken over compressions himself. But the patient's rhythm was deteriorating fast. V-fib, then asystole. They'd shocked him, pushed more drugs, kept working. But it was too late. Time of death. 12:14 a.m. Carla opened her eyes. The unit was dim now, shadows lengthening. She checked her watch. 5:30. She'd killed him. Not directly, but close enough. If she'd kept going, maintained compressions, maybe the surgeon would have arrived in time. Maybe they could have stopped the bleeding, stabilized him, given him a chance. But she'd frozen, and he'd died. The hospital had been kind about it. Administrative leave, counseling, no formal discipline. Just an understanding that sometimes, after 22 years, burnout catches up. Sometimes nurses snap under pressure. But Carla knew the truth. She'd seen something that night. Something that shouldn't have existed, and it had broken her. Now she understood what it had been. The flatline. Frank's name for it. The thing that fed on medical guilt, that collected nurses who failed. It had been there in the trauma bay, watching, waiting. And when she'd frozen, when the patient died, it had claimed him. Now it was coming to claim her. 6 o'clock. The sun was setting. Carla watched through the window as the light faded from gray to darker gray to black. At 6:47, the last of the daylight disappeared below the horizon. Darkness fell over the hollow. Carla stood, turned on every light in the unit. Overhead, table lamp, bathroom. Flooded the space with brightness. Checked the door locks. Deadbolt secure, chain in place. Horseshoe hanging above the frame. She sat on the edge of the bed, fully dressed, back straight, waiting. 7:15, nothing. 8 o'clock, still nothing. At 8:47, the siren went off. Carla flinched, but didn't move. The sound echoed across the hollow, rose and fell, then died off. Silence returned. 9 o'clock. The unit felt smaller now, the walls pressing in. Every creak, every sound amplified. 10 o'clock. Carla's nerves were stretched to breaking. She kept expecting the knock. Kept hearing footsteps that weren't there. 11 o'clock. Still nothing. The waiting was its own torture. Worse than the actual manifestations.
At least when the patients knocked, she knew what she was dealing with. This anticipation, this dread, it wore her down minute by minute. She understood now. The flatline was letting her suffer, making her anticipate, building the fear. When it finally came, she'd already be broken. 11:30. Carla sat rigid on the bed, watching the door. Any minute now, any second.
The Mercy Ward, Scene 9. The Third Patient, Part 1. 11:32. The clock on the nightstand seemed to tick louder than it should, each second stretching into eternity. Carla sat on the edge of the bed, hands gripping her knees, watching the door, waiting. The unit was bright as an operating room, every light on, flooding the space with harsh fluorescent glow. It didn't make her feel safer. If anything, the brightness made the shadows beyond the windows look darker, more solid. Outside, the hollow was perfectly still. No wind, no animal sounds. Just the distant rush of creek water and the occasional creak of settling ice. Carla's throat was dry. She'd tried drinking water an hour ago, but her stomach had rebelled, threatening to bring it back up. She was running on adrenaline now, nerves stretched wire-tight. She knew what was coming, knew when it would come. August 14th, 1983, 11:47 p.m. That was when Michael had been wheeled into her trauma bay. 28 years old, motorcycle versus guardrail on Route 43. The medics had done what they could, but internal bleeding was catastrophic. He'd needed a surgeon, needed blood, needed time. He'd gotten none of those things. 11:38. Carla forced herself to breathe. In through the nose, out through the mouth, the way they'd taught her in nursing school. Back when she thought medicine was about saving people instead of watching them die. She fought about running, just bolting for her car, driving until she hit the Ohio border, keeping the gas pedal down until she was somewhere the hollow couldn't reach. But Frank's words echoed in her head. It'll follow you home. Wait until you're alone. At least here, she had iron, had warning, had a chance. 11:43. The minutes crawled. Carla's hands trembled. She pressed them harder against her knees, trying to stop the shaking. 11:45. Almost time. Almost time. Carla stood. Her legs barely held her, but she forced herself upright. Walked slowly to the door. Not to open it, just to be close. To face whatever was coming head-on instead of cowering on the bed. 11:46. Carla's breath came faster. Her heart hammered against her ribs. 11:47. Knock, knock, knock. 3 times, urgent, desperate. Carla's breath caught. Her hands went cold. She'd been expecting it, but the sound still hit like a punch to the chest. I need help. The voice was young, male, strained with pain. Please, I'm hurt. I'm bleeding. Carla knew that voice, hadn't heard it in 6 months, but she recognized it immediately. Michael, the 3rd patient. Please, knuckles rapped against the door again, harder this time. I can't. Nurse, are you there? Every instinct in her body screamed to open the door. She was a nurse. A nurse helped people. A nurse didn't sit in a locked room while someone begged for aid outside. But Michael wasn't a person. Not anymore. Please, his voice cracked. I'm so cold. There's so much blood. I can't. I don't want to die out here. Carla's eyes burned. She pressed her hands over her mouth, trying to hold back the sob building in her throat. Nurse Simmons? Carla? The voice changed, became more focused. I know you're in there. I can hear you breathing. She went rigid. I remember you, Carla. You were there that night, in the trauma bay. You were the one doing compressions. She shook her head, even though he couldn't see it. Even though he shouldn't know that. You were doing everything right, the voice continued. Following protocol. Epi, atropine, fluids. The surgeon was on his way. 10 minutes out. I just needed to hold on for 10 more minutes. Tears streamed down Carla's face. But then you looked up, saw something in the corner. Something that shouldn't have been there. Her hands trembled. And you froze. The words landed like blows. I was 28 years old, Carla. I had a fiancé, Sarah. We were getting married in October. She picked out the flowers, booked the venue. Yellow roses she wanted. Said they meant friendship and joy. Carla squeezed her eyes shut, but the tears kept coming. I had a daughter too, Emma. She was 3. Loved dinosaurs. Used to make me read the same dinosaur book every night before bed. Triceratops was her favorite. Stop, she wanted to scream. Stop talking. Carla turned and slid down the door, sinking to the floor with her back against the wood. But I never got to see Sarah walk down that aisle. Never got to see Emma turn 4. Never got to do any of the things I was supposed to do. The voice turned cold now. Angry. Because you froze. Because you saw something and you just stood there. The doctor had to push you aside, take over. But those 5 seconds you wasted, that was the difference. That was my life. Carla was sobbing now, shoulders shaking. You know it's true. You've known it for 6 months. That's why you quit. That's why you can't sleep. That's why you're here. She pressed her hands harder over her mouth, trying to stay quiet, trying not to let him hear her break. Open the door, Carla. The voice was right against the wood now, inches from her face with only the door between them. Face what you did. Face me. Her hand moved toward the knob. She couldn't help it. The guilt pulled at her like a physical force, dragging her forward. She needed to see him, needed to tell him she was sorry, needed to make it right. Her fingers touched the cold metal. That's right, the voice encouraged. Let me in. We can talk about it. You can explain what happened. Maybe I'll understand. But Frank's words cut through the fog. Maybe that's enough. Maybe you walk away. Or maybe you join them. Carla's hand froze on the knob. No, she whispered. What? No. Louder now, stronger. I won't open it. Silence. Then the voice changed again, became something darker, more cruel. You don't have a choice. Yes, I do. You owe me, Carla. You owe me my life back. You owe Sarah her husband. You owe Emma her father. I know. Her voice cracked. I know I do, and I can never pay that debt. Never. Then open the door and pay it now. She stood, legs shaking, but holding, turned to the door, put her hand on the deadbolt. That's right, the voice said. Do what you should have done 6 months ago. Face the truth. Carla unlocked the deadbolt, slid the chain free, gripped the knob. The voice on the other side went quiet, waiting. She took a breath, then another, and opened the door. But she didn't step back to let him in. She stepped outside. The cold hit her like a wall, February air cutting through her clothes, freezing the tears on her face. But that wasn't what made her blood turn to ice. Michael stood on the porch, young, pale, hospital gown soaked in blood. Road rash covered the right side of his face, angry and raw. His eyes were open, staring at her, the same eyes she'd seen go flat and empty in the trauma bay when they'd called time of death. He looked exactly as he had that night, alive, dying, already gone. "There you are," he said. His lips moved, but they were blue, bloodless. "I've been waiting for you." Carla forced herself to stay standing, to not run, to not scream. "I'm sorry," she said. Her voice was small, but steady. "I saw something that night, during your code. Something that shouldn't have been there. Something wrong. And I was scared. I froze." Michael tilted his head, blood dripping from the gown onto the porch boards. "I failed you," Carla continued. "I failed your fiancé. I failed your daughter. I should have kept going. Should have pushed through the fear, and I didn't. You died because of me." "Yes," Michael said simply. "I did." More tears. She didn't wipe them away. "And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I can't undo it. I can't bring you back. I can't give you your wedding or your daughter's 4th birthday, or any of the life you should have had. All I can do is say it. I'm sorry." Michael stepped closer. His bare feet made wet sounds on the wood. The smell of antiseptic and blood filled the air between them. "You think sorry is enough?" he asked. Carla met his eyes. "No, nothing's enough." "Then, come with me." He extended his hand. The fingers were pale, blood-stained, cold. "Join the others who failed. That's where you belong." She stared at his hand, at the young man who should still be alive, should be married to Sarah, reading dinosaur books to Emma, living his life. This was the choice. Take his hand and follow him into the darkness. Let the guilt finally consume her. Stop running. Or refuse. Carla looked at his face one more time, memorized it. The road rash, the pale skin, the eyes that held nothing but accusation. Then she stepped back. "No," she said, "I won't come with you."
The Mercy Ward, Scene 10, The Third Patient, Part 2. Michael's face twisted. "You don't have a choice." He lunged forward, faster than anything dead should move. His hand clamped around Carla's throat, fingers ice cold and impossibly strong. He lifted her off the ground like she weighed nothing. Carla tried to scream, but her windpipe was crushed shut. No air, no sound, just pressure and cold and the beginning of panic. She clawed at his hand. Her nails scraped against skin that felt like refrigerated meat. He didn't even flinch, just held her there, suspended, watching with those flat, dead eyes. Her vision started to gray at the edges. Then 2 more figures emerged from the darkness beyond the porch light. The first code blue patient, the woman from 1982, both wearing hospital gowns, both pale as corpses, both moving with that same wrong fluidity. "It's easier if you stop fighting," the woman said. Her voice was almost kind. "We all tried to resist. It doesn't work." The first patient nodded. "Better to just let go. Come with us. Join the others." Michael's grip tightened. Carla kicked uselessly at the air, her lungs burning. He was dragging her now, pulling her off the porch toward the woods, toward the creek. She could hear it, the rush of water over stones. The sound grew louder as they moved closer. 20 feet to the tree line. 15. Carla's body screamed for air. Her vision tunneled, but somewhere in the oxygen-starved haze, a voice cut through. Not Michael's, not the others. Her own. "Move, move, move." The same paralysis that had frozen her during Michael's code was trying to take her now. The same fear, the same inability to act.
But this time, she fought it. Carla slammed her free hand into Michael's face, connected with his nose, felt something crunch. He didn't react, just kept dragging her forward, 10 feet to the trees. The woman reached out, touched Carla's arm with fingers like frozen worms. "Don't make it harder. It's almost over." Carla twisted, kicked at the woman's knee. Her foot passed through it like mist. The woman's form rippled, but re-solidified immediately. 7 feet. She was losing. She knew it, could feel consciousness slipping away. The creek was so close now she could see it. Mud and rot and iron-rich water. If they got her to that creek, it was over. 5 feet. Then a voice roared across the parking lot. "Get away from her!" Frank burst from the office, iron fireplace poker raised like a weapon.
He ran with surprising speed for a man his age, covering the distance in seconds. He swung the poker at
Michael's arm. The iron connected with a sound like meat hitting a grill. Michael shrieked, a sound that was nothing human, and released Carla. She dropped to the ground, gasping, throat on fire. Frank swung again. The poker caught the woman across the chest. She screamed too, higher pitched, and stumbled backward. Her form flickered like bad television static. "Get back inside." Frank shouted at Carla, "Now." Carla tried to move, tried to crawl, but her body wasn't responding. The lack of oxygen, the terror, the cold, everything conspired to keep her frozen on the ground. Michael recovered first. He turned toward Frank, face twisted in rage. The other 2 patients flanked him, forming a semicircle. "This isn't your fight, old man," Michael hissed. "Everything in this hollow is my fight," Frank said. He held the poker steady, eyes hard. "You want her. You go through me." The 3 patients moved as one, but they were wary now, keeping distance from the iron, circling, looking for an opening. Carla used the distraction, dug her fingers into the frozen earth and dragged herself a few inches, then a few more. Her vision swam, but she kept moving. Had to get to the unit. Had to get to safety. Behind her, Frank swung the poker in wide arcs, keeping the patients at bay. But it was 3 against 1, and they were learning his patterns, testing, probing. Carla made it to the porch steps, grabbed the railing, pulled herself up. 1 step, 2. That's when she saw it, standing at the edge of the woods, just beyond the reach of the porch light. The flatline, tall, impossibly tall, wearing hospital scrubs that were too pale, too clean. And where its face should be, there was nothing. Just smooth skin, blank, featureless, wrong. The same thing she'd seen in the trauma bay. The thing that had frozen her then. It stood perfectly still, watching, waiting. And seeing it now, Carla's body locked up completely. Not Michael's hands this time, not the cold. Just pure animal terror at something that shouldn't exist. Something that defied every law of nature and reason. Her muscles refused to move. Her breath stopped. Even her heartbeat seemed to stutter. Behind her, Frank was still fighting. She could hear the poker whistling through air, hear the patients hissing and circling. But it all seemed distant now, muffled. The flatline took a step forward, then another.
moving with a gliding motion that made her gorge rise. No joints bending, no natural movement, just progression. It reached the porch. Carla tried to scream. Nothing came out. The flatline extended one hand. Long fingers, too many knuckles, skin that was the same dead pale as the scrubs. Somewhere behind Carla, Frank shouted her name. The poker clanged against something, but the sounds were growing fainter. The flatline's hand touched her shoulder, and everything went cold. Not winter cold, not February cold, the cold of deep space, of absolute zero, of death itself. Carla felt herself being pulled, not physically, deeper than that, like the thing was reaching inside her chest and pulling out something essential. The porch disappeared, the parking lot, Frank, the iron poker, all of it faded into darkness. Then, water, creek water, ice cold and moving fast, closing over her head, filling her mouth, her nose, her lungs. She tried to swim, but her arms wouldn't work. Tried to kick, but her legs were dead weight. The current pulled her down, rolled her over stones that scraped her skin. Water flooded her throat. She coughed, breathed in more water. Her chest burned. Her vision went from gray to black. The last coherent thought before the darkness took her. I froze again. Then nothing. Just cold. Just water. Just the creek, claiming what the hollow had demanded. Above, on the bank, Frank stood with the poker still raised. But the patients were gone. The flatline was gone. And Carla was gone. He'd lost her. The creek rushed past, indifferent. Somewhere downstream, it would give her back. It always did. That was part of the pattern, part of the cruelty. Frank lowered the poker slowly. His hands shook, not from fear, from rage, from failure. He'd tried to save her, warned her, given her iron, even intervened physically. Wasn't enough. It was never enough against the flatline. He stood there in the February darkness, listening to the water, waiting. Eventually, he'd have to go back to the office, call it in, wait for morning to find what the creek left behind. But for now, he just stood, bearing witness, because that was all he could do anymore, all any of them could do. Hold the line, try to save the ones that came, and when they died anyway, remember them. Remember they tried. Remember they fought. Even if they lost. Frank turned and walked back toward the office, the iron poker cold against his palm. Behind him, the creek kept flowing. The hollow kept watching. And somewhere in the darkness, the flatline waited for the next one. Patient, hungry, inevitable. The Mercy Ward Epilogue. What Frank found. Frank didn't sleep. He sat in the office all night, coffee going cold in his mug, watching Unit 4 through the window. The lights were still on, blazing bright. Empty. He knew what he'd find come morning. Had known it the moment the creek took her. But protocol was protocol. Had to wait until dawn. Had to make it look natural. At 6 a.m., when the winter sun finally crept over the hollow's edge, Frank stood and walked to Unit 4. The door was locked from the inside. He'd watched Carla get pulled into the woods, watched the darkness swallow her. But the door was locked anyway. That was how it worked. The hollow had rules, cruel ones, but rules nonetheless. Frank used his master key. The lock turned with a soft click. He opened the door. Carla lay on the bathroom floor, face down, arms sprawled, wearing the same clothes she'd had on last night when the flatline took her. But she was soaking wet. Her hair was plastered to her skull. Water pooled beneath her body, spreading across the tile. Frank could smell it. Creek water, mud and algae and rot. Bits of brown vegetation clung to her sleeves. He knelt beside her, checked for a pulse, already knowing there wouldn't be one. Her skin was ice cold, pale, eyes open, staring at nothing. The expression on her face made his chest tight. Frozen terror. The look of someone who'd seen something they couldn't process, couldn't accept, couldn't survive. Same expression as the nurse in 1976. Same as all the others the flatline had claimed. Frank closed her eyes gently. It didn't make the expression any better, but it felt like the right thing to do. He stood, surveyed the scene. No signs of struggle in the unit itself. Window closed and locked. Door locked from inside. Nothing broken. Nothing disturbed. But Carla had drowned. Drowned in creek water that was hundreds of feet away through dense woods. Drowned and then been brought back here. Left for him to find. The flatline's signature. Its calling card. Frank walked to the office and called Sheriff Morrison. Same sheriff who'd handled the 1976 case. The cemetery incident back in 81. The thing at the mill in 79. Morrison knew better than to ask too many questions in this county. Tourist, Frank told him when he arrived 20 minutes later. Checked in Friday. Found her this morning. Morrison looked at the body, at the water, at the locked door. His jaw tightened, but he nodded.
Drowning? Looks like. Morrison didn't ask how, didn't ask why, just called it in. Coroner would rule it accidental drowning, cause unknown. Body would be sent back to Columbus. Sister would be notified. Life would go on. Except for Carla, who'd been drawn to the hollow looking for answers and found only death. After Morrison left with the body, Frank walked the perimeter of Ironwood Retreat. Checked every iron horseshoe hanging above every unit door. Reinforced the ones that needed it. Salted the thresholds fresh. His father had built this place in 1974 to hold the line, to give people a chance against the darkness that lived in Grindstone Hollow. Some made it through, some didn't. But Frank would be here either way, watching, warning, witnessing. In the office, he found Harold McKinnon's card in his desk drawer. Old, faded. Harold McKinnon, Willow's Bend, one of the last active guardians. Frank thought about visiting, asking for advice, asking if there was anything more he could have done. But he knew what Harold would say. Same thing his father had said. Same thing all the guardians said before they abandoned their posts in 1973. You can't save them all, but you keep trying. You hold the line. Frank put the card back in the drawer. He walked to Unit 4. The cleaning supplies were already in his truck. He'd scrub the floor, change the sheets. By afternoon, the unit would be ready for the next guest. Because that was the job. That was the watch. Someone would come. The hollow would call them. Pull them here with dreams or compulsion, or guilt they couldn't shake. And Frank would be waiting. He'd warn them, give them iron, tell them the rules. Some would listen, some wouldn't. Some would survive, some would die. But he'd be here, because someone had to be. Someone had to stand between the darkness and the people it hunted. Even when it wasn't enough, even when they died anyway. That's what it meant to hold the line. Frank stood in the doorway of Unit 4, looking out at the hollow. Winter sun climbed higher, casting long shadows through the bare trees. The creek kept flowing. The woods kept watching. And somewhere in that darkness, the flatline waited, patient, hungry, knowing another would come. They always did. But Frank would be ready. He always was. That was the job. That was the watch. That was what it meant to be the last one standing. He closed the door to Unit 4, locked it, put the key back on his ring. Then he walked to the office, poured fresh coffee, and sat down at his desk, watching, waiting, holding the line. For as long as he could. For as long as it took. Because the hollow never stopped. And neither would he.